Hello everybody, welcome to part 5 in this series of the Python beginner tutorial. Now in today's video we are going to talk about numbers. We are going to talk about the three data type in numbers, which are the int, float and complex. Now we are not going to go deep into them. We are just going to scratch them from the surface because this is a beginner tutorial. But still, I'm going to do a video in the future, still in this series, on advanced topic on this three data type. So you can stay tuned for future videos, or maybe by the time you are watching this video, it might already be out. So I don't know. So let's dive into this video. Now we take the first one, which is integer. Now to write an integer, as we know, integers are numbers that does not have any decimal point. So an integer, any number that does not have a decimal point, is an integer, just like this one here. So let's create a variable. As we always work on Python, we just create a variable. Now let's create a variable, call this number. So let's say this number will be 1. Now a thing I didn't point out in previous video is checking for the type, checking the data type of that variable. Now automatically when we define this variable, is mapped to a data type. This data type can be a string, can be an integer, can be a float, can be a complex, can be a complex number, it can be a list. We have, you already know now. So how can we check for the data type of any variable? So in this video I just want to show you that now we write our print statement. Now we write type. Then what type do is to check for the data type. So we open our bracket, then write the name of the variable we want to check its data type. So when we save this and run the code, we get class int. Now this is very interesting. Now why do we see class int here? Int stands for integer, which means it's a data type of int. Now why do we see a class? Now any data type in Python is a class. Now why is it a class? Because it has to be a class because it has different methods or different functions that can help manipulate that particular data type. It has attributes and methods. Now that's out of the, let's keep that aside and focus on this video. In the future we are going to focus on class because class is an intermediate level tutorial. Now let's talk on how we work on numbers, how we deal with numbers, integer in Python. Now since we've created a variable called number, we can do some operation here. We can do some operation, mathematical operation such as addition, subtraction, multiplication and division. So we can add two numbers together. We can add one. We can also create another variable. Let's call this number 2. Number 2 equals to 8. Let's call this 8. Now what this first expression means is to add these two numbers together, 1 plus 1. When we print this to the console, let's save and run, we get 2. So if we change this value 3, we can perform. So now with this method, with this idea, you can actually make a simple calculator, but we are not going to do that now. We are going to do that in future video. Now the next thing I want to do is to do subtraction. You should get -2. You can do multiplication. We get 3. Now a tricky thing in Python is when we want to do division with the backslash. Now if we want to do division, let's say we are doing a division of numbers that they're supposed to give you a whole number, but the surprising thing is that it gives you a float. Now let's divide this. We get 2.0. Now why do we get 2.0? Because normally when you divide some numbers, you're supposed to get a float. At most times you get float. Now, because of this, Python converts every single time you divide any number, it converts it into a float. So that's it for division. So we can actually check the type of this number now. You can see it will print float for us. So let's check the type of this number. So if we check the type, it's going to print class float because it's a class of float. Now let's now go straight into float now. So let's say 6.7. We can do some addition, but let's save this and print it to the console. Interesting. We can add numbers together. We can add a non you can add an integer to a float, so it will still give us a float because it converts it into a float, converts everything back into a float. We can actually now add float to float, it will still give us float. So let me not add again, let me do subtraction to give us 0.7. Don't know why it gave us 0.0 0.700. Sometimes it just malfunctions, but sometimes it just does the right thing. Let me do 0.1. So we can also write 0.1 just like this. I don't know why this thing is malfunctioning now with division. Oh, I think most times it does that. So you have to remove those extra parts. Now let's do for multiplication. Now we get 20.1. Then division, let's divide by 1. Let's not stress ourselves here. Get 6.7. Now, since we have looked at float and int, let's see how we can convert back to an integer and convert back to a float. So let's say we get 6.7. What if we want to convert it back to an integer? We can just go to the back of this number. Oh, press on that. Just write int. So it gives us 6. It removes the 0.7. So it converts it back to an integer. Now let's say we have an integer, we want to convert it to a float. We can just say, we can come here and write float at the end. Control S. We get the 0.0 being printed attached to it. Now this is very cool. Now let's talk about complex numbers. Now complex numbers simply means adding j. I just think of it like that, adding j to it. Now if we add j, it makes the number a complex number. So let's say 6j. We can actually print this now to the console. We'll get 6j being printed. Now, interesting thing we can do, we can add, we can also multiply, divide, and subtract. We can add complex number to a complex number. We can also subtract complex number from a complex number. We can do stuff. So you can actually test a lot of things. You can divide complex number by complex number. You can divide it by a non-complex number. Let's do that. Let's see what it gives us. You just have to be guessing. We will never know the value because it does the calculation all by itself. So you can actually use this to make your own calculator. Now, interesting thing we want to talk about now is Python does multiplication first. It does things in this order. We all know this acronym BODMAS. What am I doing? I just want to write this. just bracket of division. Oh, there's nothing like of here, we don't need that. Bracket, division, multiplication, addition, and subtraction. So if there's a bracket, it does those things inside the bracket. If there's a division, it does the division first before multiplication, before addition, before subtraction. So let's write series of calculation. Let's say times 2, sorry, 6 plus 7 divided by 9 gives us a particular answer that I don't know. So it gives us this. Does this first, or it does this first before this, then before adding everything together. So that's it for manipulating numbers and integer complex numbers and float. So I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you learned something. You can subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet, and stay tuned for next video. Thank you for watching.